begin, I do want to say that I have a pretty bad sinus infection today, so if I don't shake your hand, or I'm blowing my nose, or I just fall down in the middle of the sermon, that's what's going on. Today's passage is from the book of Genesis, chapter 32, verses 3 through 32. 3 through 30. Genesis chapter 32, verses 3 through 30. Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. He instructed them, "This is what you are to say to my master Esau. Your servant Jacob says, I have been staying with Laban and have remained there until now. I have cattle and donkeys, sheep and goats, manservants and maidservants. Now I am sending this message to my Lord, that I may find favor in your eyes." When the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, "We went to your brother Esau, and now he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." In great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into two groups, and the flocks and herds and camel as well. He thought, if Esau comes to attack one group, the group that is left may escape. Then Jacob prayed, "O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, 'Go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper.' I am unworthy of the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed the Jordan, but now I have become two groups. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. But you have said, I will surely make you prosper, and make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted." He spent the night there, and from what he had with him, he selected a gift for his brother Esau: 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 female camels with their young, 40 cows and 10 bulls, and 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. He put them in the care of his servants, each herd by itself, and said to the servants, "Go ahead of me, and keep some of the space between the herds." He instructed the one in the lead, "When my brother Esau meets you and asks, 'To whom do you belong, and where are you going, and who owns all these animals in front of you?' then you are to say, 'They belong to your servant Jacob. They are a gift sent to my lord Esau, and he is coming behind us.'" He also instructed the second and third and the others who follow the herds, "You are to say the same thing to Esau when you meet him, and be sure to say, 'Your servant Jacob is coming behind us.' For he thought, 'I will pacify him with these gifts I am sending ahead. Later, when I see him, perhaps he will receive me.' Jacob's gifts went on ahead of him, but he himself spent the night in the camp. That night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, and 11 sons, and crossed the ford of Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled the man. And the man said, 'Let me go, for it is daybreak.' But Jacob replied, 'I will not let you go unless you bless me.' The man asked him, 'What is your name?' Jacob he answered. Then the man said, 'Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with man and have overcome.' Jacob said, 'Please tell me your name.' But he replied, 'Why do you ask my name?' And he blessed him there. So Jacob called that place Peniel, saying, 'It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared.'" So everybody likes Bugs Bunny, right? One of the classic cartoons, right up there with Mickey Mouse or Scooby-Doo. I noticed something about Bugs. This is probably true of every cartoon character ever, but for some reason it stands out in my mind with Bugs more than anybody else. Whenever Bugs had to make a moral choice, trying to decide between right or wrong, the same thing always happened. On his right shoulder there would appear a little tiny version of Bugs, dressed up as an angel. And he'd tell Bugs not to do the bad thing, leave poor Daffy Duck alone. He's been through enough. And then on his other side, there'd be a tiny version of Bugs dressed up as the devil, saying, "No, you should go ahead and play this trick on Daffy. And remember, Daffy tried to convince Elmer Fudd that rabbit season starts today, so he deserves what he gets. And the two little angels and devil would argue for a while and eventually end up in a fist fight because apparently Bugs' good side is still prone to violence. And eventually, Bugs would usually do the mean thing to Daffy, because let's face it, that is funnier. And I remember this from as a kid, and I always took it as a silly little cartoon joke. But as I grew, I came to understand there's a lot more going on there. And this is a real demonstration of the struggle we all face. That our struggle with God, our struggle with right and wrong is a real struggle. And in a symbolic and a little silly way, Bugs was externalizing the struggle that happens inside all of us. So today I want to talk about another man who had that same struggle. Today we're going to return to the life of Jacob. And really we have two separate stories today. We have Moses beginning with the story of Jacob returning home to Esau. And then he pauses that story to tell of Jacob wrestling with God, and then closes out the story of Jacob returning to Esau. It might seem a little disjointed to us, but Moses was using an ancient style of storytelling that we might call it a sandwich style of telling a story. That is, he starts one story, pauses in the middle to tell another story, and then finishes up his first story. So the first story acts as bookends, or bread on a sandwich surrounding the middle story. And in this style of storytelling, usually the story in the middle, the meat of that sandwich, is the one that really matters. So today I want to talk first about Jacob returning to Esau, and then we'll look at Jacob wrestling with God. As we pick up the story today, Jacob has decided to go home to Esau. I don't know why he chose to do it right now. We're told that God told him he would prosper when he returned, but I don't know if there was some incident that got him headed home. Maybe he heard about some event back home. Perhaps now that his kids were coming of age, he wanted them to see their ancestral home. Or maybe he just thought it was time to make up with Esau. Whatever the case, Jacob returned back to his homeland. But this was a dangerous trip for Jacob. He left his home because Esau was ready to murder him for stealing his birthright and their father's blessing. Now, 20 years have passed, but Jacob really didn't know if Esau had forgiven him yet. And I think in this, we're finally going to see Jacob grow up. Now in this passage, we have seen Jacob as kind of a trickster. Try to get something over on someone. And I think the old Jacob would have tried to con Esau, to get an advantage out of him. But now we see a Jacob who has struggled. He's grown from that struggle. He's played a lot of tricks, but most of those tricks have backfired on him. He has had a few tricks played on him. Now we're going to see a more mature Jacob. And he recognized what was going on, and he openly went to Esau. He admitted his past mistakes. He tried to make amends. He even sent Esau some very lavish gifts, trying to get on Esau's good side. But then Jacob heard that Esau was coming to meet him with 400 men on horseback. I think here we see a little bit of the old Jacob come out. Because when Jacob hears this, he assumes the worst of Esau. Generally speaking, the way we live is how we see the rest of the world. And if we are kind and generous and honest, then we tend to see the world as an optimistic and kind place. If we are selfish and dishonest, we tend to see the world as a selfish place. Jacob spent a lot of time being dishonest, and now he assumes that's what Esau is doing. He assumed that if Esau was coming to meet him with 400 horsemen, it meant Esau was coming to attack. And so in response, Jacob divided his camp into two groups. He seems to have kept his fighting men, his cattle, his herds on one side of a river, and he had his family go to the other side of the river. Thinking if Esau attacks, at least he and his family will be able to make a quick getaway. But Jacob still went to meet Esau. He traveled out, he saw Esau coming, and he went out alone to meet him. And the story, this is kind of a tense moment. If you don't know how it ends, there's some real fear here. Will Esau forgive Jacob? Will Esau even listen to what Jacob has to say? This could have been the end of Jacob's story. But Jacob went to Esau to ask forgiveness. I think I once before mentioned a painting I saw at the Indianapolis Museum of Art. It is called Jacob Seeks Forgiveness from Esau. And it shows Jacob kneeling down before Esau with Jacob's family in the background, and Jacob asking for Esau's forgiveness. As I looked at that picture for a while, I realized that the artist has placed us in the position of Esau. We have Jacob looking out at us, saying, "Will you forgive me?" I think the obvious implication is that the artist is asking, if we were in Esau's shoes, would we forgive Jacob? Now, forgiveness is a topic you've heard me talk about a lot, so I'm not going to spend that much time on it today. All I want to say is this. Is there someone in your life that you have not forgiven? Is there someone in your life that you are holding on to a grudge against? Forgiveness has to start somewhere. Now, forgiveness takes time. We'll find out that Esau did forgive Jacob, but it took him 20 years to get there. Forgiveness can take time, but it has to start somewhere. If not for the other person's sake, then for our sake. Nothing can harm us more than holding on to bitterness. I once heard someone say that unforgiveness is like drinking poison and then waiting for the other person to die. So in your own life, is there someone who you have been holding on to bitterness against? If so, what is the next step, or what is the first step you need to take towards forgiveness? Well, with that said, let's turn now to the other story for today. Jacob's wrestling match with God. Evening had come. Jacob had sent his family and his herds away. He was alone in the dark. At that moment, a man showed up and began to physically wrestle with Jacob. They wrestled throughout the night. And then at some point during the night, Jacob realized he was wrestling with God. That must have been a really weird moment. And the two wrestled throughout the evening, and then the man said to Jacob, "Let me go, because it's almost daybreak." And at first that doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, they've been wrestling for hours. What's a little longer? But we need to remember this is God. And one of the common themes of the Bible is that a sinful man cannot see God's face and live. He's saying, "Let me go." God was trying to spare Jacob's life. Now, obviously God's not literally trapped here. God could have allowed Jacob to see him and still live. There are various people in the Bible, Abraham, Jeremiah, Isaiah, who at least see a vision of God and they survive. And really, if God wanted to, he could have picked Jacob up with his pinky and tossed him in, China and been on his way. But that's not the point. God was intentionally leaving Jacob in a very precarious and life-threatening situation. Because God wanted Jacob to rise to the moment. Jacob is a tough character to deal with, because he's not always been a good guy. He has been dishonest. He has been a cheat. He has been untrustworthy. But he's starting to grow up. His 20 years in exile, Jacob struggled with God, and he became a man of God. He started to become a pretty good guy. Now God wants to take him the rest of the way to become a great man. And so God put Jacob in this dangerous situation so that Jacob could rise to the challenge. And of course, Jacob did. Jacob held on to God, saying, I will not let you go unless you bless me. Jacob put God's blessing above his own life. And so God did bless him. God said, "What's your name?" And Jacob told him his name. And God said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob. From now on, you will be called Israel." Because you have struggled with God and with man and have overcome. I think that is the perfect name for Jacob. He is a man who struggled with God. Of course, this story of Jacob wrestling with God isn't just Jacob's story. It's not something that happened one night. It's the story of the nation of Israel. It's the story of our lives today. From this point on, Jacob and his family will be known as the Israelites. I can't think of a better name for them. They are the people who struggle with God. The whole of the Old Testament is telling the story of how Israel struggled with God. It is the story of Moses trying to come up with any excuse he can think of not to follow God's call. It's the story of the people who turn to idolatry and reject God as king. It's the story of David, the man after God's own heart, who commits adultery and murders the husband of the man he slept with. The woman he slept with, sorry. It is the story of Israelites turning away from God so much that God sends them into exile. And when God brings them back, they left his temple in disrepair for decades. Yet through all of this, God always calls the Israelites his people, and they always call him their God. For all the times they struggled with God, as long as the Israelites held on to the Lord, God would not let go of them. And I think this is our story today, that we struggle with God. The struggle begins before we even come to Christ. John Bunyan, a Christian writer, once described the hound of heaven. I'm going to be a little loose with Bunyan's words here. But he said that when we first realize that God has set his eyes on us, our natural response is to run away screaming like little girls. Because we know what God wants. We know that God has come to tear out that selfish, self-centered part of us, to kill off the part of us that says, I want to do things my way. Bunyan said that the hound of heaven is a bloodhound that continues to chase after us. That as we run from God, God continues to pursue us. That he will not give up on us. So the hound pursues us until we know the Lord. And then we come to God, and it is a struggle. There's a part of us that is always turning away from God. A part of us that is struggling against the call of God. It makes sense. It's what Paul called the old self. It makes sense that old self would struggle against God because God has come to kill it. It's that part of us that says that I know life's unfair, I just wish it were unfair in my favor more often. It's the part of us that thinks that there should be one set of rules for me and another set of rules for everybody else. And God has come to kill that off. He's come to set us free so that we can fully follow Christ. And it is a struggle. But the struggle matters. Because God is bringing us to him. I remember once, several years ago, I had a friend say something to me that really struck me. He said, Brian, I know God's working on you because I can see you fighting him. At the time, that sounded strange to me, but I later came to recognize the truth. That when God is at work on us, we tend to fight against him. But we have a God who does not abandon his work. We have a God who continues to call after us. And I know in my own life, I tend to struggle. I think pretty much every time God has ever called me to something new, my first response has always been, I'd really rather not do that, God. No, thank you. I can't really imagine where my life would be today if God would let it go at that. But our God does not let us go. Our God is persistent, calling us to him. Yes, it is a struggle. But we have a God who does not give up. We have a God who will complete the good work he has started in us. And there will be a struggle within us. We have a God calling us to his name. So here's my final thought for today. In your life right now, where's your struggle? Don't be ashamed if you are struggling. We are all struggling. Where is your struggle with God right now? Perhaps there's someone who you simply have not taken any steps towards forgiveness for. And you need to begin the process of forgiveness. Maybe you've told a lie and then told another lie to cover that first one, and another lie, and it's just built around your life and you need to come clean. Maybe you're dealing with an addiction. You've come to the point where you recognize you need help. Where in your life right now are you struggling? Because God renamed Jacob. He named him Israel because he struggled with God and man. But he also said that Jacob overcame. Not that he overcame God, but he overcame himself. After all his struggles, Jacob finally became the kind of man that would be worthy as remembered as the one who followed the Lord. So where in your life right now are you struggling? In a moment we're going to stand and sing our invitation hymn. And as we stand to sing, if you have been trying to avoid your struggle, you've been trying to look the other way, if you need to confront your struggle with God, you have an opportunity today. I ask you to stand with me now for our invitation hymn. How Great Thou Art, number 4. And we're going to sing all the verses.